It was 2013, and I was 17 when my family started looking for a new house. We found one in a quiet neighborhood, tucked away at the end of a cul-de-sac. The owner was an older man who seemed kind and welcoming. He said he'd built the house himself, and it had been his pride and joy for years. I stayed at the back, observing silently as my parents talked to him, and I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something wasn't quite right. Then, something happened that still makes my heart race to this day. In the middle of the conversation, the man suddenly turned away from my parents. His face, normally warm, twisted into a mask of sheer hatred, his eyes burning with a fury I can't describe. It lasted only a second, but I saw it, and it felt like an eternity. I don't think he noticed me. My head was down, pretending to fiddle with my phone, but I watched closely. When he turned back to my parents, his face returned to its usual friendly smile as if nothing had happened. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me, and I didn't want to sound crazy. Later that night, I mentioned it to my mom. She just shrugged it off, saying he was probably just socially awkward. But I couldn't shake the thought something about him felt off, and it stayed with me like a dark cloud. Despite my unease, we bought the house. It was a good deal, and we were desperate to settle into a new place. At first, everything seemed fine. But it didn't take long before strange things started happening. One Sunday morning, my family left for church, but I decided to stay home. I was feeling a little off, like I didn't want to be around people. It was just me and the house. Around 11 a.m., as I was flipping through a book, I heard a loud bang. Then another, and another. It sounded like someone was hammering something against the side of the house. The storm outside was violent, but the sounds were too deliberate to be the wind. They seemed rhythmic, like someone was trying to get my attention. I walked to the window, but I couldn't see anything. The noise lasted for about 5 minutes before it suddenly stopped. Then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft at first, then louder, coming from downstairs. I froze, unsure of what to do. I grabbed a baseball bat I kept under my bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I crept to my door, listening. The footsteps moved through the kitchen, chairs scraping, cabinets opening, the fridge door creaking open. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I knew no one else was home. I locked my door, dialing 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I could barely get the words out. My voice was barely a whisper as I gave them my address. My mind raced, and I quickly texted my mom. She was about 30 minutes away, and the house felt like it was closing in on me. The footsteps were getting louder, closer. I could hear them at the base of the stairs. The door handle jiggled. I froze. The fear was suffocating. I felt paralyzed, unable to move. I could hear breathing on the other side, heavy and shallow. I gripped the bat tighter, my knuckles turning white. The seconds felt like hours. Then, just as quickly as it started, the footsteps stopped, and I heard the back door open and slam shut. The police arrived soon after. They checked the house thoroughly, but found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of anyone being there. My mom came home, and I told her what happened, but she seemed skeptical. Still, when she looked down the hallway, she stopped dead in her tracks. We changed the locks and added security cameras, but I never felt safe again. The feeling of being watched never left me. Have you ever felt like someone was there, watching you, when you were all alone? Leave a like if you've had a similar experience and comment below your story. Months passed, and things seemed to settle down. But I couldn't forget the man who built the house and that moment of pure hatred. It gnawed at me, leaving me restless. One evening, while I was doing homework, I heard it again, the tapping. It was faint, like someone was knocking on the walls. Knock. 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 I tried to ignore it, but it was persistent, happening whenever I was alone in the house. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the pipes, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was deliberate. Then the dreams started. They weren't just nightmares, they were vivid, almost too real. I would dream of the house, of its walls crumbling, of shadowy figures watching from the corners. I woke up gasping for air, only to hear the tapping again, softer this time, but still there. My parents dismissed it as my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I moved away for college, hoping that distance would bring peace, but my parents stayed behind. Every so often, I would get a call from my mom. She would mention something strange, like a picture frame falling off the wall for no reason, or the distinct sound of footsteps when no one was home. She'd laugh it off, but I could tell she was just as unsettled as I was. The house was still doing its best to keep its secrets. A few years later, we moved upstate to a new house. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with older residents. The house we bought had once belonged to an elderly couple who had moved out for reasons no one seemed to know. At first, everything felt normal. But after a while, things started to feel off again. One afternoon, I was home alone, working on some assignments, when I heard footsteps upstairs, in my mom's room. I went to check, thinking maybe my parents had come home early, but the house was empty. No one was there. On Thanksgiving morning, as I loaded food into the car, I heard a voice, soft, old, and frail, behind me. "Be careful with that." I turned around, expecting to see my mom or someone else, but there was no one there. I looked up and down the street, but the neighborhood was quiet. My mom came outside, and when I told her what happened, she was confused. She hadn't said anything. I tried to brush it off, but something didn't sit right. A few weeks later, while I was home alone again, I heard the sound of faint sobbing. It was coming from somewhere deep in the house, like it was behind the walls. I called my mom, and she said she'd heard it too. But we couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't the dog, and no one was crying. It sounded too human. When I asked my mom about it, she mentioned my grandmother. But that didn't make sense. Grandma hadn't visited the house after she got sick. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was lurking, waiting to be noticed. Have you ever had a strange encounter in your home? Comment below and share your story. It's always good to know someone else has experienced the same unexplainable things. Then there was the time I was 12, in Kansas. My parents were out, and my older sister was at work. I was home alone with the dogs when I heard the front door open and shut. At first, I thought it was my parents, but the dogs didn't bark. I called out, but no one answered. I grabbed a baseball bat and went to check the house. It felt wrong, like something was just out of reach, hiding in the corners. I called my dad, but he didn't answer. Panic set in, and I dialed 911. As I waited, the sound of the door opening and closing kept echoing in my head. Just as the police pulled up, my parents came home. They thought I was overreacting. But I knew what I'd heard. We never found any signs of a break-in, but that feeling of someone being there, watching me, lingered for a long time. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that something is out there watching, waiting. Silent. The tapping, the footsteps, the faces that flicker in the corners of my mind. It's all still with me, like a shadow that never leaves. Whatever haunted those houses, whatever followed me, it's still out there. Like this story if you can feel that uneasy chill creeping up your spine, and subscribe for more stories that will leave you questioning what's real.